Berlin was furious. The Chinese ambassador was called in. No press conference, no smiles, just a warning. This was reckless. This was dangerous. But what triggered this sudden diplomatic firestorm between the two global powers? At 0700 hours, somewhere above the Red Sea, a German surveillance jet cruises at altitude. Its mission routine overwatch as part of Operation Aspides, a European Union effort to shield merchant vessels from Houthi rebel attacks. The skies seem quiet, but what happens next isn't part of any standard patrol. Without warning, a Chinese warship below fires a military laser straight into the aircraft's path. No radio call, no flare, just an invisible burst of light. Silent but aggressive. The beam hits its mark. Inside the aircraft known as an SMP or multi-ensor platform, the civilian flight crew and Bundeswehr mission operators scramble. Alarms trigger. Sensors flicker. They don't know what the laser did, but they do know one thing. This isn't just hostile, it's a message. Within minutes, the mission is aborted. The aircraft makes a sharp turn and heads for Djibouti. No casualties, no physical damage, but the message has landed loud and clear back in Berlin. Germany calls the act reckless, unacceptable, dangerous. The Chinese ambassador summoned the same day. What was meant to be a simple patrol has now become a full-on diplomatic incident, and one that could change how the EU handles rising Chinese presence in Middle Eastern waters. Laser attacks between military powers aren't unheard of either, but between China and Europe, that's new. And when it happens during a high-risk mission in a conflict zone, everyone pays attention. So, what exactly is the MSP? And what kind of laser was this? And why would China take a shot like that now? Strap in. The story is just beginning. The German aircraft involved wasn't a fighter jet or a drone. It was something far more specialized and far less visible. Known as a multi-ensor platform, the aircraft was flying under civilian registration but carried out military surveillance work, a hybrid operation flown by a civilian crew under contract with Bundeswehr mission specialists handling the onboard systems, the mission system operators directly from the Bundeswehr. These MSPs don't carry missiles. They carry eyes and ears, long-range optics, radar systems, infrared scanners, and electronic intelligence gear. Their job is to monitor the surface of the sea, track ship movements, and sniff out threats to European commercial shipping. Think pirates, missile launchers, or unmanned surface drones, especially in areas like the Red Sea, where Iranian-backed Houthi rebels have launched attacks on container ships in recent months. And that brings us to Operation Aspides, started in early 2024. The mission is Europe's direct response to the chaos in one of the world's most vital shipping lanes, the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. These waters carry fuel, food, and tech between continents. Aspides was meant to be defensive only. No offensive strikes, no escalation, just patrols, escorts, and electronic overwatch. But now, a Chinese Navy ship has just introduced a whole new variable into that equation. What kind of ship was it? Well, official sources aren't saying, but multiple defense analysts suspect a Type 052 destroyer or similar platform, both of which are equipped with laser-based countermeasure systems. Normally used to blind drones or confuse optics, these weapons can be deadly if misused or intentionally targeted. And here is where it gets a little uncomfortable. China isn't part of Aspides. It wasn't coordinating with the European forces. And according to German officials, there was zero communication before the laser hit. No identify yourself, no leave the area, just a shot in the dark, literally, with military forces from Europe, the US, China, and even Iran operating in overlapping zones. One false signal could spiral into something far worse. And this was no mistake. Military lasers sound like science fiction, but for anyone flying surveillance missions over tense waters, they're a very real threat. The German MSP aircraft was operating at medium altitude on a steady surveillance leg. Below, the suspected Chinese warship was sailing in international waters. Then, without any form of contact, it activated what Germany later described as a military-grade laser system and aimed it right at the patrol jet. The laser wasn't visible to the naked eye, but its effects were. First, the MSP's optical sensors began to malfunction, blinking, distorted. Certain feeds turned pure white or pure red. Classic signs of laser overexposure. These platforms rely on high-powered optics to track threats across the sea. A blinding pulse can temporarily knock out that capability or even permanently damage sensor hardware. Second, the crew's situational awareness degraded. While the pilots weren't physically harmed, they reported alarm signals and interference on key monitoring equipment. That's consistent with exposure to directed energy, especially if the beam was strong enough to affect onboard systems. Within 24 hours of the incident, the German Foreign Ministry summoned the Chinese ambassador for an urgent explanation. The language was direct. Germany called the laser strike entirely unacceptable and accused China of endangering personnel and disrupting an EU security mission. And that's critical. This wasn't just about Germany. It was an attack on a multilateral European operation. The German defense minister confirmed the mission was aborted immediately. The safety of our personnel is non-negotiable. He stated this action by China was irresponsible, dangerous, and escalatory. But the fallout didn't stop just there either. German officials pushed the EU's Political and Security Committee to review risk protocols. In Brussels, diplomats began openly questioning whether Chinese forces should still be treated as passive observers or as potential disruptors in a volatile region. Meanwhile, Beijing remained silent. No denial, no explanation, no justification, just silence. Strategic, calculated silence. And that's deeply worrying. Germany is no stranger to international tensions, but this wasn't over Taiwan or the South China Sea. This was happening in a zone where Europe is actively deployed under a formal mandate to protect one of the world's most critical trade routes. Some German officials are now pushing for an update of the rules of engagement, especially for surveillance missions near hostile forces. Others urge caution, not wanting to escalate tensions with China. But behind closed doors, one thing is clear. This wasn't routine interference. It was a clear signal. Even NATO took notice. While Aspides is an EU-led mission, analysts confirm that key military alliances are now watching the Red Sea more closely. Because this wasn't just a flash of light in the sky. It was a political flare, one seen from Berlin to Brussels. The Red Sea isn't just another stretch of ocean either. It is one of the most strategically loaded waterways on the planet. Every day, tankers and cargo ships carrying fuel, grain, electronics, and rare minerals sail through this narrow corridor, disrupt that flow, and the global supply chains buckle. That's why Europe launched Operation Aspides in the first place, to safeguard civilian shipping from Houthi drone strikes and missile threats spilling over from Yemen's ongoing chaos. But what started as a mission against rebel attacks is now colliding with something much bigger: great power maneuvering. China's navy has been expanding its footprint in the region quietly but steadily. In Djibouti, Just across the water from Yemen, Beijing operates its first overseas military base. Officially, it's for anti-piracy support. Unofficially, it's a forward operating point for the People's Liberation Army Navy, or PLAN, complete with destroyers, drones, and electronic warfare units. This laser incident makes something crystal clear. China is no longer just watching. It's actively shaping the security environment, even if that means clashing with EU forces in what was supposed to be a coordinated mission zone. Europe, meanwhile, isn't used to dealing with this kind of behavior from Beijing. Sure, there have been trade tensions and tech concerns, but a direct military incident, that's new. And it's forcing a rethink of how Brussels views China, not just as an economic rival, but as a potential military spoiler in areas far from Asia. There's also the shadow of the president. Remember back in 2020, a similar laser was fired at a US P-8 Poseidon over the Pacific by a Chinese destroyer. Washington condemned the act. Beijing again stayed quiet. Sound familiar? That same silence is now unsettling European allies, because if lasers are being used as warning shots or worse, tests, then every patrol flight, every escort mission becomes a potential flashpoint. This isn't just about the Red Sea. It's about China projecting hard power outside its traditional zones of influence, and Europe suddenly finding itself in Beijing's crosshairs. And in a world already full of overlapping conflict zones from Ukraine to the South China Sea, nobody's in the mood for miscalculations. Inside EU military planning rooms, the conversation has shifted. One question leads every briefing. Was this a one-off or a warning? If China intended to send a message, it was received loud and clear. The MSP was unarmed, the mission was legal, the airspace was intentional, and yet a high-energy laser was used to interfere with it. That's not an accident. That's a deliberate act of pressure, maybe even an attempt to redefine who gets to operate in the region. European officials now face a strategic dilemma. If they change patrol routes to avoid Chinese vessels, they look weak, like they're backing off from a mission meant to secure global trade. But if they keep flying close and firm, they risk further confrontation. One mistimed maneuver or failed communication could trigger a real-world escalation. There's also the technology angle. EU surveillance aircraft like the MSP aren't hardened against laser attacks. They were never meant to be. But after this, that may have to change. NATO has long discussed laser countermeasures for combat aircraft, filtering optics, thermal shielding, rapid sensor repositioning, but now those conversations are accelerating in Brussels and Berlin. Behind the scenes, several EU states are calling for joint protocols on how to respond to directed energy attacks, something that until now was mostly a footnote in defense playbooks, and the legal questions just as thorny. Military experts point out that international law doesn't clearly define laser interference as an armed attack unless it causes casualties or physical damage. But that legal gap is exactly what makes these weapons attractive. They blur the line between provocation and escalation. So what now? The Aspides mission will continue. That much is certain. The German jet was grounded, but only briefly. Patrols have resumed. Routes have been adjusted slightly. Crews are now flying with one eye on the sea and the other on whatever is glowing below. That real change isn't tactical. It's mental. China just forced the EU to admit we're not just peacekeepers anymore. We're players in a game where the rules are being rewritten one invisible beam at a time. One laser, no casualties, no wreckage, but a whole new chapter in European security. What happened over the Red Sea wasn't an accident. It was a stress test for rules of engagement, for diplomatic resolve, and for the EU's ability to navigate in a world where power projection is no longer following old boundaries. Germany reacted quickly. The EU is reviewing its protocols. But the broader takeaway here isn't clear. China isn't just rising, it's reaching into spaces Europe once considered safe, or at least neutral. That illusion just got burned away one beam at a time. For now, the patrols continue as Aspides is still in motion, but every MSP in the air is now a potential target. Not for missiles, not for signals, for lasers and disruption. These are tools of modern confrontation. Not always loud, not always explosive, but always calculated. This leaves one big question. If China is willing to target a European aircraft during a legal defensive mission, what lines won't they cross next? What's your take? Should Europe respond with stronger force protection like laser shields and escort fighters, or focus on diplomacy and restraint? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read everyone. And don't forget, if you want to go a step further and support our channel here, please join the fleet. You get loyalty badges, priority responses, and help us bring more true maritime stories to the surface. Click join on our channel page and get on board. Because in today's world, it's not always missiles that make the first move. Sometimes it's a light you can't see until it hits you.